Hello, and welcome back to the My First Marathon podcast, where we interview runners in all stages of their running careers about their first marathon experiences to prove that anyone can run a marathon. My name is Taylor, and today's runner is a dad, marathoner, and run streaker with 10 years in between his first and second marathon. We dive into a lot of detail about training for the Philly Marathon last year, where he PR'd his marathon time by nearly 2 hours, as well as how consistency through his run streak has really allowed him to show up better for his family and for himself. We go on a little shoe tangent at the end, so if you're a shoe fanatic, make sure you stick around for that. Let's jump right in. Please welcome Bobby. Bobby, thank you so much for spending some time with us this weekend. You got your run in this morning. How many miles did we get in for the streak this morning?
Today was 4.5 miles.
All right, nice way to wake up the day for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, excited to break down your journey. We just talked a little bit about it, but you had quite the gap from your first marathon to your second marathon. So excited to kind of put those pieces together. But we could just start from the beginning. How did you get introduced to movement, to running? How did this all come about for you?
Yeah, so about 100 years ago when I was a kid, I was always a runner. I did cross country in middle school, 8th grade, I ran. And before that, I always played sports. I was primarily basketball was my sport when I was young. So I did that. Cross country really was more like a cross training thing for me. I was always fast. I wanted to be one of the faster kids. So that was a good sport. Um, I had a shoulder injury, and so that kind of ended basketball for me and
Mm.
transitioned to tennis. But in high school, I took a pause from the cross country team until my senior year. I ran again, and then it's really I was running, myself, but not competitively, and that's kind of I've been running since college. I didn't run in college like for the college or anything, but always did running for myself, and it's just a good meet time. Get outside, get some uh, fresh air, time, space, music, whatever it is. It's just like that dedicated period of time for me.
Cool. So had a
So
relationship with movement from pretty early on, and then that just kind of transitioned into something that you had for yourself in college. Um,
absolutely.
with everything going on in college, having that stress relief. I wish that I was a runner a little bit sooner, so I had that stress relief in college. That's pretty cool. And in that time, was racing even on your mind, or it was really just something for you?
Yeah, I would do races here and there. I'm I guess a competitive person in general. So if there was like a 5K or something, I would do it earlier on. Um, as I got older, I tended to like more medium distance. My favorite distance to race is 10 miles, actually. I feel like
Mm,
it's long enough but short enough. Like it's a challenge, but not killer in terms of like training going into it.
sure.
So I like 10Ks, that tends to be a distance I really like to race. I'll do 5Ks, obviously, they're a lot easier to find. Um, but yeah, I enjoy racing. So, during my gap from marathon to marathon, I definitely filled in plenty of races in there to keep, just to kind of see where you're at, see the progress, see where you maybe need a little improvement.
Sure. Yeah, and your first marathon was in 2014. So where were you at in life when you were starting to think about that first marathon?
Yeah, so 2014 was actually a kind of cool period in my life. My wife and I had my son was born in 2014.
Mm.
So that was kind of cool. So leading up to that, I just decided that, well, let's see, I'm 42 now. So back then I was just turning, I guess, 30, if I did the math correctly. And so it's like, oh, I'd like to do a marathon just to kind of, one of those life achievement things. I think I want to do one. And I had a really good friend. She also had done a marathon. So we committed to doing it together. We trained together. I use air quotes for that though, because we didn't live close to one another. So we would
Virtual
do our,
trade.
yeah, so we would do like, oh, we would check in and do that. But we committed to running the race together, at least most of it together. So our first run together was actually the Harrisburg Marathon here in Pennsylvania, is what was my first marathon. And we ran, I think it was about 22 miles together. And then my phone died. And so there went my music too. So
Oh
our commitment
shoot.
was at any point in time, either one could be like, okay, we're just gonna like go faster or slower. I said, I think I need to pick up the pace a little bit just for like my sanity. So I think I finished maybe like 2 minutes ahead of her. So nothing crazy. I think it was 4 hours, 56 minutes was my first marathon. So, survived, which is always a good first goal for your first marathon.
Sure.
And it was a cool process though. I remember, the Harrisburg Marathon it actually is this weekend again, and so it was training in the summer, similar to like you've experienced. I think you had yours last weekend.
Yep.
Um, so summer training is a challenge, I think, in general, because it really you know messes with your mental. You have those really hot, humid days, depending where you're at, that can just make you feel like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this?
Totally.
So I think that adds to the dynamic though in training. But yeah, I think I did a random training plan. I don't remember where. I'm sure I found it on the internet, and they're like, okay, we'll do this on the weekend, we'll do this during the week, and so forth. It wasn't. I didn't run every day at that point in time, so it was. But I survived.
That's all you can do for your first one. It's going to be a PR no matter what. You're just setting that baseline for all the future
Exactly.
marathons to be able to build off of. So that's great.
Yeah.
And I know it was a really long time ago, so feel free to push me off if it's stuff that you don't remember.
Yeah.
But what do you remember about training for that first one? Because I know that there's a lot of milestones that you're hitting leading up to that first marathon.
Yeah, I remember actually a lot of frustration during the training, just because, you know, there's those days you just don't feel well. You start out and things feel like, oh, I feel good, and the newer runners, I'm sure maybe you've experienced this where you probably start out a little too fast because you feel good, and then all of a sudden, the proverbial wall, you get hit, and you're like, ooh, that's not good.
Yeah.
So that was one aspect that I remember pretty vividly, like being just discouraged, like, oh man, I don't know, am I gonna make this whole journey? Um, Another aspect that I didn't do very well was any fueling. I did no fuel on any training runs really, that I can remember. Maybe on like the longer long runs, I might have had like Cliff or something, but I don't remember doing too much fueling really. And I'll pause that aspect a little bit when we talk about the second one.
Sure.
I did do hydration fairly decently, I guess. And I kind of hated it. I had one of the best things. Hated the sloshing, hated the weight, but kind of summer running, you need a little hydration. So yeah, I mean, I think overall, once the weather of fall started to kick in, felt a little bit more confident, a little better. Like, okay, maybe it'll be okay, and it was.
Yeah. Summer running is it really messes with you, like you said. It's like your pace is a good 30 to seconds to sometimes even a minute slower, depending on where you live out in the country. And I think training for your
Yeah,
first one, you could just assume like all runs are going to be like this if that's your first exposure to running those longer runs in that heat.
yeah,
So do you have a distinct moment, if you remember, where like the temperatures dropped and you were like, oh, okay, this is what
yeah. I
running
did.
feels like?
Yeah, it was. It was. I don't know the specific date because it was so long ago, but it was definitely like a September date. Um, it was one of those days, you get up early. Well, at least I did. Try to get it out of the way, and it was just like a crisp fall morning, and I ran. I think it was like 18 miles, and it didn't suck. I was like, okay, it's only a little bit longer than 18 miles, so like let's get 6 more miles or 8 more miles. So, which I guess people that don't run are like, you're crazy. But it was just like I was like, okay, I think I'll be okay.
Yeah, you can start to wrap your head around the distance a little bit, especially the closer you get. Do you remember if 18 was the top that you got to, or did you go all the way to 2022?
I think my longest was supposed to be 20, and I think I stopped 19.
Gotcha.
And I was like, yeah, I'll be okay. It's only another 10K.
Yeah, close enough. Well,
Round up.
cool. And yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then we know the race went pretty well. Was there anything notable from your first marathon that you remember, like anywhere where you ended up hitting that wall that you were talking about, or any moments where you got like a boost of confidence, anything like that?
Yeah. So what was cool was, I live in Harrisburg area, so it was like the local race for me. So number one, there was a lot of supportive like friends that came out and were different spaces. It was cool to see them. and then kind of knowing like where you were, where things like elevation might change a little bit. So overall, that was cool. My friend and I, we did well, I think, throughout the race for the most part. But then uh, what happened was I knew part of the course goes through, it's called Wildwood Park. And in Wildwood Park, there's actually a pretty significant hilly portion. And we knew that it was happening. I knew it was coming. But in my mind, so like there's also a community college in that area. So this was before they changed the course. In my mind, I thought you did the Wildwood, then you did the college, and then you went back to the river, and the river's all flat. But you actually went through the college first and then the hills, and so that kind of
Oh
really
no.
messed with my mind because I just like I was ready for it, but then it didn't happen for a couple more miles, and that was the first time we actually walked was when we got to those hills there. We're like, oh man, and then shortly thereafter, my phone died, so my music died, and so it was kind of a little disheartening, I guess, in that aspect of it. So for those that record their runs, I was using Runkeeper at the time. My longest run recorded was only, I think it was like 23 miles because
Oh,
my phone died.
so brutal.
I didn't even
Oh
get
my
credit
gosh.
on the app, so but it's all good now.
And I use Runkeeper too. They really tempt you with those little, they'll have everything grayed out until you run
Mhm.
the race and it'll stay like that
Yeah,
until you hit it. It's so frustrating.
yeah, yeah. I'm now on Strava, so at least I made a move.
There you go. Yeah, yeah, that is super frustrating. And I can imagine those hills just being like later in the race in general was really mentally tough. What were you kind of, if you remember, what were you saying to yourself during those moments to be like, let's finish this thing. Let's get this medal.
Yeah, so my friend and I, we were just, when we got to the Wildwood portion of the program, we did a good job of running, and I said, it's okay to walk. Like, these are pretty serious, in terms of the race overall. So let's just survive it. Don't deplete all of our energy here. And then we pushed through, and, once we started getting back to more flat land, and it was like slightly downhill, um, we were in better shape. I think, the accumulated fatigue, I think there was some walking breaks, at least for me, towards the end, and that was fine. I was hopeful that I would at least break 5 hours. That was kind of like my back of the envelope goal there. For survive was a goal, and then B goal, can I get below 5? And I just got there, so that was kind of fun there.
Yeah, so I had a little bit of a time goal.
Mm.
And then once you crossed the finish line, because you had this goal of finishing this, it was like a very pivotal time in your life where you were starting to have kids, like transitional phase. What were you thinking from there? Were you thinking you were going to continue to do this whole marathon thing, or were you thinking I'm going to have to kind of reframe my relationship with running a little bit?
Yeah, certainly you have that overwhelming, all sorts of emotions, kind of exhaustion in general, physical, mental, at least for me. So it was just, I think at that point in time, I thought, okay, I did one, so that's cool. I don't know. I wasn't necessarily ready for another one. And so I didn't really have that as a goal. I did a couple more half marathons in between that were, a good distance to aim for. Um, as you said, we have two kids, so it was family time and that kind of stuff. Definitely still made time for running. Um, I did, in terms of, I won't fast forward too far, but yeah, so it was just kind of keeping going with the running in general and finding races here and there.
Yeah. So kind of took it down to the half marathon. Is that the distance that you ended up running the most in between your marathons? Was the half marathon distance?
I would say 10Ks were probably my most, just because I didn't really need to train for that, and for me anyway. I could jump into that, and there are just so many 5Ks. I'm sure I did a fair number of those just because I like to support community organizations, and they were an easy way. Why not get some exercise in and do something good? Um, there was one in the area that ended last year. It was called the Hero Run. That was a 5K, and part of it you ran through the local mall. So that was just kind
Oh,
of
wow.
cool. Like he got to like be a kid, like literally run through the mall that like they always tell you not to do.
Yeah, that's so
So
fun.
just kind of fun stuff like that. Lots of those uh, sprinkled throughout. And I actually did one ultra marathon between marathon one and marathon two. It was like a 12-hour endurance kind of thing.
Oh, wow.
Of course, I did the 36 miles because you got the sweatshirt. So had to get
You
that
have to.
goal.
Yeah, of course, of course.
Yeah.
The incentives that we all shoot for sure.
Right.
So okay, so cool. So you did kind of hit the marathon distance in between the two actual marathons. And it was it
Yeah.
one of those formats where you the 12-hour marathons where you just go out, take a break, go out, take a break. What
Yeah.
was that format?
Yeah. So it was. I forced my goddaughter. She was um, in college at the time. I said, "Hey, you want to do this with me?" And she said, "Sure." Didn't really think of it. Her longest run before that was like 8 miles.
So she
Didn't
was
train
making
at
quite the
all.
jump.
Yeah. So we would do the course, and the course was a loop. So I think it was a mile and something loop, maybe longer. I guess it would have to be longer. It was about a 3 mile loop ish. Sounds about right. And so part of it was a little uphill, part of it was a little downhill, and we would run part, walk part. So it was just kind of like fill some time, depending on how we feel. Stop, eat some, ultra runner type snacks, pickles, sandwiches, chips, pretzels. So it was kind of like a really enjoyable experience, actually. Like the ultra vibe is completely different uh, in that aspect. And then I did a Ragnar. I did two Ragnars. I did the trail, and then I did a road, and those were kind of in between there as well. That was kind of nice to do.
Yeah, Ragnars are they're intimidating for sure. For anybody that doesn't know what a Ragnar is, you might just kind of give a 30-second elevator pitch on what it is.
Absolutely. So it's like a team-oriented race trail. You have three different loops, and so you do like a short, medium, and long, and then the road you start in one place and you end in another location. You have different legs that you would do throughout. You do three of those as well, but the legs kind of differ from one another. I did the Pennsylvania one last year as kind of a training run for the marathon. I started in Harrisburg and I ended in Philadelphia, and my legs added up to 23 miles. So, but there were somewhat that were like 10-ish. You can have a little distance difference.
Yeah, it's a cool concept for a race, especially it's like the team aspect is really fun. How did you pick your
Mm-hmm.
team? Was it like friends, family? Who was
Um,
all part of the crew?
Yeah, so our local Fleet Feet here sponsored a team, and I was selected as someone to join.
That's
So
awesome.
it was really cool. I knew the owner of the store he ran with the team, and I actually worked there for a short period of time prior to COVID. And everyone else, it was new friends. So that was kind of cool to get to know different people. And now I have like a different little running group there.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's cool. And you said that this was all on the road to running your second marathon, right? These were kind of your
Yeah,
training runs.
yeah, yeah.
That's
So
a cool way to train. Yeah.
it was, yeah. And so last year, I think I mentioned I'm one of those crazy run streakers. So pretty much every day is a training day of some sort. I would say about, for me anyway, 90% are super easy runs. I don't really push it. But I had that in the fall of last year, and then I did the Philly marathon in November of last year. So it just kind of fit in really nicely to have that. It was about, I would say, 6-ish weeks before the race was the Ragnar. I want to say it was October-ish.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, and the run streaker stuff. I'm sure we'll get into kind of the reason why this all came about for you. But how far along are you, or were you at that point in your run streak, running every day?
All right, let's see. So, actually, last that last year, so my longest run streak was 748 days. It
Wow.
started St. Patrick's Day of COVID year. Um, and it was like I'll run every day till I go back to work, and then I just
Sure.
started getting into like, oh, let's just see how long this goes. And my wife and I had um, a second kiddo, so I was able to keep the streak going a little bit into after she was born, But then eventually fatigue caught up and I skipped a day. And then I was like, okay, it's all right to take a little not run every day kind of streak there. So
Yeah.
I'm still running a little bit, fairly regularly, but not every day. And then last June, so I guess last June 2023 is when I started this current streak. So that was probably a couple months in, maybe 3 months into this streak here. I think I'm at like 525-ish some days. I don't really count them.
Yeah.
I do them, but I'm not like an active like counter. I only looked because I knew we were talking.
Yeah, but I mean, still really impressive. So 700, 500-ish is where the run streak has been. And I know a lot of people who don't do run streaking or maybe have criticisms of run streaking are always curious about like why?
Yeah.
Why do the run streak? So why for you is it important to run every single day?
Yeah, so for me, like, running is like my me time. And like I said, I would say the vast majority of my runs are not strenuous at all. Low heart rate, my mileage, maybe 3 miles is what I aim for. Some days it's just a mile because that's what I have time for based on what's going on in life. So I just it's for one, it's like that consistency of dedicating some time to doing it. I know that when I don't run every day, I find myself with bigger gaps of not running at all.
Mm,
So I think it just keeps me accountable to myself. And I just like, having that positive period of time, whether it's before the day starts or I'm fortunate to have a job where I can run at lunchtime, um, or at the end of the day, if that's when it fits in based on whatever work obligations or life obligations. My motto to myself is I should be able to find 8 minutes to get a mile in. And I've usually been able to do that. Thankfully, awesome wife. Kids appreciate it. My little, still small enough for a stroller running, so and she really
it's to
likes it.
come.
Yeah. Um, Last week, my son had baseball, soccer games, so threw her in the stroller, ran 6 miles to the field, and then threw the stroller in the car and came back home.
That's perfect. Yeah, so you just
Yeah.
just kind of find ways to piece it into your already busy life. It sounds like that's something that is important to you, and if it's important to you, obviously you're going to make a priority to do it. So I think that's
Yeah.
awesome. And
Yeah.
then how did you feel like this all like so you weren't run streaking when you ran your first marathon, obviously you were in a different
Yeah.
place in life. So do you feel like being like building that habit and being consistent like that helped you run your second marathon, or how did that kind of impact training?
Yeah, I'd say one of the most positive impacts to my running has been running every day. I can look back at all of my running, effort times, finishes, races, and I've gotten like notably better since I started running every day. I think the consistency actually is really helpful. And I know for me anyway, like post race, like post marathon, yeah, I run the next day, obviously, nothing crazy, but like I feel like my body responds better by like that active recovery. For me, it's just something that's really helpful. So for me, I definitely think that has been something that's been really helpful. I'm not really one who does like gym time. I just get bored. I run outside every day. I don't have a treadmill. I live in Pennsylvania, so a lot of runs are very cold. But I actually like that. Um, yeah, my wife's rule for me is if it's lightning, I have to go to the gym. So fortunately, I do have access to a gym. I just don't choose to go there very often.
Cool. Yeah, so impacted the training positively, and since there was such a big gap, I know you had the ultra in between as well. But since there was such a big gap in marathon training for you, what do you feel like? Like, did you have any goals in mind of what you wanted to change coming into the block for Philly?
Yeah. So again, what really was my impetus for doing Philly was another decade. So let's just see where I'm at in terms of that distance. It's a big pill to chew. So what I did was for the second one, I used Garmin Coach. So I have a Garmin watch, and as a kind of like little experiment, I thought, well, let's just see like how I could do based on Garmin's programming. And so didn't really have, I know my fitness, from where I was to where I am was a lot better, but I didn't know what that means at, a marathon distance because I don't really run that distance very often. So it's
Sure.
kind of cool to watch Garmin's progression of Garmin's expectation for me. Um, and I'm not sure how many people use it, but I know there's some polarizing opinions out in the internet about Garmin's projections. For me, I've found it to be pretty spot on. Um, I I have some theories on why some people may not be where they're at with Garmin's projections, but for me, it was kind of cool to see, as I really ramped up the training, my projected time um, continued to get lower and lower. Um, I set a goal of like, okay, well, can I get sub 4 like at the beginning of the training block? And by the end, I told my closer circle of people, I'm like, I think I'm going sub 320, which is like a crazy goal
Wow.
to go from like 456. I was like, but I'm going to go for it because I don't know if I'm going to run any other anytime soon. So the Garmin projection started like 345 ish for me, and by the end it was down to 315, and I
Wow.
finished in 312. So it
Pretty
was
spot
like,
on.
yeah. So for me it was, and that's pretty much any distance. I've usually come under what Garmin was recommending.
That's great. Well, I'm curious now about these theories. You said yeah, you've got some theories. What do you think is going on with some of the Garmin race predictions?
Um, so I'm a big proponent of mental strength. I know a lot of people that I think aren't comfortable being uncomfortable. So when things kind of feel off, they tend to pull the plug rather than push through. And I'm not talking about like an injury or anything like that, but like
Sure.
I'm sure as you can appreciate, there are some runs where you're starting to feel a little off, and then you're like, oh, maybe I better dial it back. And I think that's an aspect, especially those longer distances where, you're kind of the sum of the parts of the run, and you're going to have miles that click and miles that don't. And I think your willingness to push through those levels of discomfort um, really impact that, that overall outcome. And so I think that's a really important aspect, at least in terms of trying to get to those goals. Again, not talking like a safety, if you're hurting
Sure.
yourself or your heart rate is like spiking like uncontrollable, don't do that.
Yeah, don't push through that.
But like just the general levels of discomfort, I think is kind of where I see people maybe not hitting those marks.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that for sure. Yeah, there's definitely, I think we expect when we're, especially when we're marathon training, when we're distance training, that there's going to come a point where every run's is going to feel easy. And I don't
Hmm.
think there's ever a point where any run is going to feel easy, especially if you're striving for new time goals. There's always going to be discomfort in there. So I
Yeah.
agree. I think there's a lot of merit in that. And I also think Garmin, it gives you a pretty aggressive goal in the beginning. And like you said,
Yeah.
the more that it tracks what you're doing and you're training with the plan that it's setting out for you, I would imagine that it's just going to continue to go down and down and down because you're getting better and better and better from where you started. It makes total sense
Yeah.
to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you like the workouts? I've never done the Garmin workouts myself. I've always kind of done the apps or a coaching plan or something
Oh,
like that.
I still I'm a big Garmin coach fan. Every day, well, that's kind of funny. Every day, Garmin gives you recommendations. I don't know if you're familiar with what
Yeah.
they look like,
Yeah.
but what I often do is I don't always do the one that's recommended for that day, but if there's always like the more recommendations option, and I'm often one who will see, okay, well, for example, today was, which is very rare, recommended rest. Well, obviously I laughed at Garmin and I said, well, I don't rest.
Stress.
So
Yeah.
I picked tomorrow's base pace run for 42 minutes, I think. Um, but I like them. They give a good mix of, I mean, it generally knows, I think it kind of learns your patterns as well. So, I get a lot of base pace recovery runs, and then I'll get one long run usually, and then I'll get like a speed workout. That's usually my 7 day block. And, um, I think it's for me that's exactly what I'm looking for in terms of a training, you know, cycle plan. Um, lately, I haven't been racing, so I've been skipping a lot of the speed workouts, skipping a lot of
Sure,
the long runs. But I still know it's out there as an option.
sure, sure. Okay, cool. So use the Garmin plan to train for Philly. And how does it do, or how did you find the plan as it was ramping up? So as it was building mileage on the weekend during the midweek runs, how did you find all of that?
Yeah, so for me, I thought it did a really good job of first, like when you set a race goal. I'm going to be doing the rock and roll half marathon in March. So I set that as my race goal for it to consider. And then what it does is it builds in like, a build up, a peak and then a deloading phase. And it's nice. It'll give you the different, targets in terms of like what it's trying to do with each block. And in terms of the programming, it does change, you know, during the Philly marathon block and my long runs were getting longer. The speed workouts were more varied, and I just think it had a really good mix. Obviously, it had me feeling confident going into the race, which I think again big mental proponent. So I think that's really helpful for you as you're training, trying to make sure you're believing in yourself.
For sure. Yeah, gotta kind of put the doubt to the side if you can, for sure, leading up to the marathon. And then you mentioned last time the 10 years ago run that you didn't really invest much into fuel at that point. What
Yeah.
had changed from a fuel aspect training for your Philly marathon?
All right. So we're gonna have a real talk here. I'm the worst. I'm like the worst example of runner. Um, I do like pretty much everything wrong. So my personal philosophy is if I'm running for an hour and a half, I'm not going to take any fuel. I'm not going to have any hydration unless it's like maybe like 90 degrees plus. Maybe I'll have like a drink.
Sure.
Um, so uh, I didn't really do any of that stuff for any of my training runs for the most part. Um, I had like an oh shoot moment like 2 3 weeks before the race, and I thought, you should probably at least have some sort of fuel for the race just to be safe. So, what does every runner not do? You don't try something new, right? Well, I did. I went with I went with Crank Sports,
Okay.
um, and so really the first time I used it was just I used one long run, and then and then I used it for the race, and thank God it worked.
Yeah.
Didn't have any reaction, and I don't tend to really have reactions with stuff. Thankfully, knock on wood. But I also don't really use it very often. So, but yeah, that's what I used. Really had a great experience. And then I took water during the race. I took the electrolyte version at each 2 miles. I think every 2 miles they had something. So I took that just to try to stay hydrated. Because you could bring a backpack, but it had to be empty, and you had to fill it there. And I was like,
Mm,
that's not ideal, and
yeah, that's a pain.
I don't really need a lot anyway because I train. I guess I kind of trained myself dehydrated, so
Sure.
all of that felt like a bonus, whatever they were offering.
Sure. Yeah, and I imagine a marathon like Philly is massive, so the aid station's got to be
Yeah,
like every what, 2 miles, 3 miles,
every
something
two.
like
Yep,
that.
yep.
Yeah, so you're pretty settled in by then. But I'm impressed, and I don't mean this as like a dig, but I'm impressed that you were able to train with like so little fuel and so little water. I wonder, like you mentioned, your body kind of gets used to it. Do you feel like that was the case? That you just kind of got used to training like that, so you didn't really need it by the time race day came around?
Yeah, I think that's a big part, at least for me anyway. That
Yeah.
wasn't anything unusual. The body's not like, where's my fuel? Where's my hydration? Just
Yeah.
kind of depends on itself a little bit. So anything you give it, I think kind of feels like an added bonus.
Sure. That makes sense. Yeah. Cool. Well, then Philly comes around. How were you feeling leading up to, let's say, like the week before Philly? How were you feeling about it?
I was super confident actually. Um, I did that Ragnar. I think the Ragnar for me was like um, it was the perfect dose of confidence. So the owner of our running store is an incredible runner. Like he wins like marathons. He's run for the Team USA.
Wow.
Um, so they're like a really great person to have. So when we were running, obviously during our downtime, we were in the van together, and I would just talk, and I was kind of talking to him like where I'm at, and I said, "Do you think this is realistic?" And he's like, "Based on what you're doing here, if it's if you're feeling comfortable, I think aim higher." So like even just hearing that from someone who's a much better runner than you, I think, and then like so during the Ragnar, my paces were like sub seven, 6:30s, 6:40s for my
Fast.
each of my legs.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, I think I can hold on. So I felt like I was in a really good place. Thankfully, no injuries or anything like that either.
Yeah. And you said Garmin put you in like a deload or a taper was it like a 2 week taper, 3 week taper? Do you remember?
I want to say it was. I think it was. I think two sounds about right.
Okay.
Um, I'm not
Yeah.
sure how well I listened to it, obviously, because I still ran every day. But in terms of intensity, I didn't push any pace at all. I saved the legs as much as I could. You know, 3 miles, easy, super recovery, tied to orientation.
Sure. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. So feeling pretty light, feeling pretty fresh for race day, and had that
Mm-hmm.
confidence of talking to somebody. I think that's so important to have people in your community who maybe have a little bit of experience, or seek out resources of people who have a little bit of experience. Not even just to gather advice from, but to gather confidence from, of somebody to
Yeah,
say like, no, you can do this. I think that's so important.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know. I mean, I've only done two, but if someone has questions, I'm always happy to share my perspective, my experience, if
Yeah,
it helps.
yeah, for sure. Cool. And then race day. So we get to the start line. Did you have any logistics
Yeah,
getting to Philly? I know that you're in Pennsylvania, but how far away were you from where the race start was?
yeah. So it was we stayed over. Made a little family trip there.
Nice.
Stayed downtown in Philly. The family stayed obviously in the hotel for a little bit longer.
Sure.
I went, I walked over. It was where we stayed was mile and a half. So I just used it as like a warm up. I jogged there, got there early, of course, because I like to be earlier than flying in late. And then I just kind of took in the environment. Um, Thankfully, the weather for me was absolutely perfect. I think it was like 45 degrees,
Oh, perfect.
um, some clouds, so nothing too crazy. I I'm a weirdo in that I don't wear like pants very often running. So it was shorts and and a tank top and had like the arm warmers, sleeves, whatever you want to call those, and had those on for maybe 2, 3 miles and took those off. And it was just like, couldn't ask for like better conditions at all in terms of a race.
Yeah, a 40-degree start is perfect. My marathon last weekend was like 45 degrees, and by
Yeah,
the end, I think it was like 60 maybe. It was
yeah,
beautiful. Makes a huge
absolutely.
difference.
Yeah,
Yeah. Cool. So everything was lining up good. So how did the let's just break down the race in maybe two or three parts. So how was the
yeah.
first half marathon for you?
All right. So my obviously not surprisingly for those that have run larger marathons, my first 2 miles were my slowest 2 miles for the race, which I think is a good sign.
Yeah, good.
Um, I intentionally was like, okay, don't start too fast, don't start too fast. But I also was like, don't start too slow, don't start too slow, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, just, and I also don't expend too much energy trying to weave around people. I moved up a corral. I asked them when I got there from what I projected to where I was at. Uh, I need to, get the faster group. Um, so that was helpful. I think once people cleared out, I kind of hung on one side of the road the whole race, and then just kind of used that as I knew there was going to be water on one of those sides, so it just made it a lot easier in trying to stay consistent. But yeah, the first half felt good. I had my music. I have a great playlist, I think. It's a playlist that I've actually shared with some friends that like whenever they do races, they're like, "Can I have your playlist?"
If you
um,
remember and you want to send it, I'll link it in the
oh,
show notes for people.
absolutely, sure.
We'll take your
Uh,
playlist for sure.
yeah, right. It's built with like 120 songs, I think. My
Oh,
one
perfect.
friend started adding to it, so I now have a collaborator with my playlist. But
Love it.
yeah, it's I think if the music helps, why not go with it?
Yeah.
But what was kind of cool was I'm also like weird in that I don't really like to look at my watch during a run, especially a race. But Garmin will announce your splits, so I kind of have to listen, I guess. But as it was announcing, it was like 6:45, six whatever. I was like, okay, this does like I didn't feel like I was pushing the pace. I felt like I was running comfortably strong. Um, and some of my friends were like sending me text messages as I was running. And of course, I was responding with Siri, like, "Oh, thank you." And they're like, "Why are you responding? Stop." But like, I just felt comfortable. But the other thing that really stood out to me was like the crowd in Philly. I know Philadelphia sometimes gets a bad reputation, but like they brought an environment to the point. So I run with my Garmin watch, but a lot of times on runs I'll use my Apple Watch as well just to control my music a little easier. And
Mm,
Apple has that sound warning. Like there were so many times throughout the race where it was like loud environment, worry about your hearing. So I think that's definitely a good experience in terms of a marathon. So you're not feeling alone. But yeah, felt good in the first half.
awesome. Yeah, crowd support's huge. So was it pretty consistent crowd support for the first half, or was it like you'd have a
Yeah,
big boost and then a little bit of lapse, or it was pretty consistent?
yeah. So the course for Philly is you start by the art museum and you run towards the river. So I don't know if you're familiar with Philadelphia at all, but that's all like the downtown area. So the first half was pretty much all downtown. The second half, you kind of go out into Fairmount Park, and there were a little more gaps. It wasn't super long, but there were just some parts that, based on where the route was, like some part of highway, people couldn't necessarily get there
Sure.
as well. But overall, pretty solid support, I think, throughout the race.
Cool. Cool. All right, cool. So then mile 14 to let's say 20, and we'll break down the last six on its own because that can kind of be its own race. So how were we
Yeah.
feeling towards the second half of the race?
So my I think my worst mile, other than like again, my first 2 miles were my slowest, which is kind of crazy to me still. Um, in the middle-ish portion in Philly is Fairmount Park, and there's some hills like there. Nothing like super crazy, like some decent, but so that was like just something to keep in mind in terms of like race strategy. Um, and then you go into a little part called Manayunk, which is kind of crazy. It's just like an up and coming part of the area, and that part was ridiculously crowded and like in a good way. Like there was just so much support, and like the proverbial 20-mile wall. Um, like the people were there to help you not really hit it. Um, so that part felt pretty good. Um, my times were still clicking in terms of like my pace. I was still really consistent in like the 45 50s um, area. So felt pretty good going through there. I brought I mentioned that the gels. I was taking them every 3 miles, I think, every three,
Okay.
4. So try to stay consistent and not like miss a gap or anything like that, and then create any sort of weird deficit.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, the aid stations, everything. You were still taking fuel as you
Yeah.
went, I imagine.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. Water. I think I tried to do like whatever. I don't remember what it was. If it was whatever like electrolyte drink. I think it was noon actually. So I tried to do that. If I missed it and took water, I didn't care. But I did try to do the whatever electrolyte version they had every 2 miles.
Cool. Cool.
And I probably got more of it on my shirt than in my mouth, but that's fine.
You were flying though, so I gotta, us maybe middle and back and packer runners, we can take a little walk through the aid stations, but you guys are throwing them back as you're going. It's
That was
pretty
fun.
crazy. Yeah. Well, cool. And then the last six. So I know you mentioned you didn't really hit the wall. So how did the whole thing kind of wrap up for you?
Yeah, so for me, the end of the race was really fun because again, thinking through the city of Philadelphia, you end running along the Schuylkill River, so it's just like a beautiful area to run. And I think that's really helpful, particularly, end of the race where things feel really not great sometimes for people. Just to have like the distraction, for me, I live again in the Harrisburg area. There's the Susquehanna River here. I run often by the river. So it's just kind of like, for me, very grounding to be next to a river. Feels like at home. But then the only weird thing that was happening is there were some people that started dropping like flies, and I'm like, okay,
Mm,
you're okay.
yeah,
but
put the
but then
blinders
but
on.
then but then feeling bad, like, oh man, like you got to 23 miles and you got a really bad cramp or whatever it was. That was just tough to like experience, like just feeling bad for your fellow runners because knowing that their day probably is ruined.
Yeah, and they work just as hard. It is,
Yeah,
yeah, very disheartening.
but yeah, and then the ending itself is again crazy. You finish back at the art museum where you started, and just the crowd there was crazy, super loud, super packed, and then trying to find your family if you can. Fortunately, my wife was texting me. She had the kiddos there, and she like left side, and then roughly like where she was, and somehow you can always find your family, right? And
Yeah, you
so
always spot
I
them.
saw them right before the end, so that was really cool. Got a cool picture of her. Like you can see like the genuine surprise reaction there. And I actually saw her early on too, um, early like maybe mile 4-ish. I want to say. And it was just kind of again really cool to spot your family because they were back in the sidewalk because it was so crowded. But you can just pick out those voices or whatever.
Yeah, such a cool feeling too when you finally see your family at the end. It's like I finally did it. I accomplished this
Yeah,
thing, and these people that I love get to see me do it. It's so cool.
yeah, absolutely. Especially like for me, one of the things I didn't talk about, but having kids. One of the reasons I run every day and set big goals is like, those little eyes are watching you. And so I like to be a good example of like, if you put in the work, it's not always going to be easy. But if you put in the work and you try your best, good things can happen for you. And sometimes it's a really long goal. It's not going to happen overnight. Um, but if you're consistent and do the work, you're going to reap a reward.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's actually leads into a question I love to ask parents because I'm not a parent myself and I give so much props to you that for training on top of raising actual children is insane. So the question that I like to ask is just like, what advice do you have for other parents who are maybe feeling guilty about prioritizing themselves in that way?
Yeah, I mean, number one, I think healthy habits are good for kids to see, um, particularly in this era of society. I think it's okay to have your own priorities. Again, I just said about setting goals for yourself. I think kids seeing you have goals, work towards those goals, and then seeing whatever that outcome ultimately is related to the goal is really, really important. And any way you can bring them into the process is helpful too. My big kid, when he was a little one, was thrown in the stroller. We would run around. Little one is always in the stroller with me. If you see my Instagram, she's often either singing a song or something. So I think it's fun for them to do that. And now, especially her of late, she wants to get out and run too. And I think
So cool.
what better testament, to doing things if they want to start emulating the things that you do. Those good habits. Certainly,
Absolutely.
I'm sure there's a lot of things we do that we maybe don't want them to follow, but that's one I would be really happy for. That to be adopted, and I think if you prioritize yourself and your for me like your mental wellness, I think that's really important. And so if you need that, I think it's okay. You're serving your family by doing those times, to take for yourself a little bit.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. Is she at fun run age or is she at 5K age? Where are we at yet?
Shelby's 3, so
Okay, she's getting
um,
there.
I'll tell you what though, we joke in our house. My son will be 10. When he plays, he does soccer, baseball, basketball, football. He currently has a broken arm, so
Oh
he's kind of on
no.
the injured list. Yeah, but we always joke he's built for power and she's built for speed.
Nice,
my
nice.
my wife was a state champion softball player. She played
Mm,
soccer, she played basketball, so she's like powerful.
yeah,
She doesn't love running necessarily, but my little, I think she's kind of more like me in that the speed sports are going to be maybe what she's more wired for, because she'll run like she only has one speed, and it's like hair on fire all the time. So I think I'm looking forward to seeing if that develops.
yeah. She's got a couple years for sure to
Yeah,
start to dip her toes into it. That's going to be so exciting to see.
absolutely.
Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for walking through your first. I know we touched on it a little bit, and then kind of how we transitioned to your more recent marathon experience. I think that was great to walk through. And then what has the goals been since then? Since the Philly Marathon.
Yeah. So life has been a little crazy in that I'm doing a PhD program, working full time. I teach at a college part time, and then kiddos. My big kid, I was coaching sports, so I didn't really set a lot of running goals other than obviously, the streak's been going. Um, I mentioned I have the rock and roll half coming up in March, so that it'll be nice to kind of turn the competitive juices up a little bit.
Absolutely
Um, build towards that. But I did. I've done some local races. I won shockingly, I won a local 10K. That was kind of cool, unexpected.
awesome.
Um, and so I guess there's a little speed still there somewhere.
Such a cool feeling. And it was like overall you won, right? Not just age group.
Yeah, like
So impressive.
overall. Yeah, I took a picture of the prize table and sent it to my wife because she was home with the kiddos, and I said, "Oh, you might get this cool fanny pack." And here I won like a gift certificate. It was even like I was like, "Oh, okay, that's like a win-win." Like I don't really
Yeah.
didn't really care about any of that stuff, but it was still kind of a nice added unexpected bonus there.
Yeah, for sure. That's what's cool about running is like you can consistently, whether you win a race or you like win your age group randomly or you hit a time that you don't expect, like you just can consistently surprise yourself the longer that you do
Absolutely.
it, especially. So it's cool like that for sure.
Yeah. So in terms of goals, in the last year-ish, I've had PRs at like every distance I raced. So the half, I'm going to set an aggressive goal of a new PR. That'll be sub 130 for the
Wow.
half. So we'll
Yeah.
see. I don't know. We'll see. I think it should be close-ish if I get my little behind back on the speed workouts. I've been lacking of late, but I still have some time, I think, to
Yeah, you've got
get
lots
those
of
all
time.
together.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, looking forward to seeing how all that works out for you for sure.
Thank you.
And there's a couple questions I like to ask at the end just to kind of wrap up.
Yeah.
I've gotten back to asking you about fuel and shoes. I've kind of pulled away from it on some of these episodes, but a few of you had requested that we start asking those questions again. So we're going to go
Oh yeah.
back to it.
Okay.
So for fuel, we know that fuel wasn't something that was at the top of the priority list for you, but do you have a favorite option that's kind of worked for you more so than some of the other options?
Yeah. So I would say I'm probably remiss for not saying this. I'm a big tailwind person,
Mm,
mostly because I hate bringing fuel. It's already incorporated into the drink aspect.
yeah.
So that tended to work really well for me. I mentioned Crank Sport. I really like that. Um, their flavors are really good, which that can be like an area where it can be less good, but obviously what you're getting is more beneficial. But I really like their stuff. Martin has always worked well for me. I like Honey Stinger if I'm going to eat something. They have usually good flavor, good consistency. Never had any issue. So that's probably be my primary fuels.
Cool, cool. And then shoes. What have you liked for shoes over time?
Oh man, that's the worst question because I am a notorious shoe rotator. Um, so at any point in time, I'll probably be using about 8 shoes at the same time.
Oh, wow.
Uh, yeah, I'm really bad. I recently just got the Nike Infinity Run 4s, and they're like a really awesome, easy run shoe um, today, just because I have them and I felt like using them. I like the New Balance Super Comps.
Mm.
I don't know why I wore them. Like I wasn't like racing or anything, but they're just like they feel good. Um, Brooks Hyperion Max, I like those more than the Tempo. I probably could talk an hour about shoes. What else? Uh, the Ghosts have been good. I don't love the Ghost Max personally, but I like the regular Ghost a little bit better. And what else? So my all-time favorite pair of shoes. You didn't really ask this question, um, but like back in the mid 2010s ish, Adidas had this line called Speed Factory,
Mm.
and it was right after the original Boost came out. This line was like a robotically made shoe, and I have this one pair that I still use faithfully that probably have over 1,000 miles on at this point, but they still have tread, they still feel good. So that's probably my all-time favorite, like just easy running shoe.
Cool. Is there anywhere where like off factories that have older versions of shoes? Like, is this the one pair and then we're done,
This is
or have
it.
you had any luck?
I haven't found them anywhere. I think maybe eBay, but I've been riding this beautiful tie-dye shoe for a really long time.
Yeah, that's cool. So once you found something you like, have you tried to find, is there anything else that's been like similar to that one that you've liked, or nothing has compared since then?
I mean, so in terms of kind of similar, the Endorphin line by Saucony is pretty close in like material.
Gotcha.
Another shoe I really like are the Nike Trail Pegasus
Mm.
Gore-Tex. Again, everyday running. So if it's raining, I don't love wet feet, so the Gore-Tex definitely helps. But they don't, for me, they're not super hot in terms. Because I know some people that have the waterproof don't really love the heat element. They don't really bother me in that regard, and they still have a pretty responsive midsole. So I would highly recommend those too.
Cool. I could also talk about shoes all day long, so we'll stop them there. But
Right?
cool. Yeah, no, shoes are super important. I guess actually I lied. I'm gonna ask one more shoe question.
Yeah.
So yeah, for somebody that has such a variety of shoes in your shoe rotation, what do you recommend for like how many shoes at a minimum would you recommend if somebody's looking into having a shoe rotation? Like one for speed, one for what would that
Yeah.
be for you?
I would say for like a newer runner, you honestly don't really, I don't know that you need more than two, like really. Um, I would probably pick more than two, but like I'm just being real. Like not everyone is crazy like me. I think I've I've recognized a benefit from like a carbon plated shoe for races, especially like those longer distances where you tend to break down, your form kind of gets a little wonky. I think that added efficiency helps a little bit. So if there's one thing I would recommend, maybe consider that. It might help you, but I know not everyone loves those either. But that's been an aspect I think that has been really helpful for me. For the marathon, I used the Nike Vapor Flies instead of
Mm.
like the Alpha Flies. I like the Vapors a little bit better. Uh, I know that's another polarizing topic for the, the world, but and currently my racer has been the Saucony Endorphin Pros. I really like those.
Cool.
But
Yeah, I like
again,
Saucony a lot.
I also have the Super Comps, New Balance that I also really like. So
All of the above.
yeah,
Well, cool. And I usually give the disclaimer at the front, but choose fuel. This is all your own journey. Try everything and anything. Everybody's feet are a little bit different. So everybody's fueling journeys are a little bit different. So just do what works best for you. But there are a couple
yeah,
suggestions in there for sure.
yeah. And absolutely go to a local running store. They're going to help you find something that works for you best.
Absolutely. Yep. Cool. All right, sweet. And then my last question for you is actually from I started this on the last episode, so this is the second episode we're doing this
Oh,
where I'm asking a question to the audience, to whoever submits a question on TikTok or Instagram. So today's comes from TikTok. From someone named at Divot David. I'll tag you down below. But the question is, how do you go about avoiding overtraining for a marathon cycle?
Yeah, I think I'm a perfect person for that. Because even though I'm a run streaker, I'm like a super low volume runner. And I think that's something to keep in mind. I feel like a lot of newer people think they have to do like 50 or more miles in a week, and I don't think you do. I think two things are important. Number one is consistency. If you're showing up, and if that's 3 days out of your week, 4 days out of your week, that's fine. Um, I think having a majority of runs at a lower intensity is also really important to keep in mind for newer runners. Don't feel like you have to run every run at a sprint because that's not realistic and you're not going to sustain that for 26 miles in particular. Um, and if you do those two things, I think you should be in a better position in your outcomes.
Awesome. Love it. Cool. Well, thanks for the advice. And again, thank you for walking through your marathon experience. It was great to get to know you a little bit and hear about your journey. If anybody wants to follow along with you on socials, where can they find you?
Right. Yeah. So Instagram, I'm Sisock Runs, CS0X Runs. Would love to connect with everybody. And if anyone has any questions, happy to help if I can.
Sweet. Well, I'll tag it down below as well. But yeah, thank you again. Awesome speaking with you.
Yeah. Thank you. You too.
Thank you so much for tuning into another episode. If you're enjoying My First Marathon, it would mean the world to me if you could rate and review the show. And if you or someone you know has ran a marathon and would like to share your story, I have a guest form to fill out in my bio on Instagram. That username is @MyFirstMarathonPod. See you on the next one.